The stories you're about to see are true and based on actual events. Names have been changed to protect the identities of the deceased. Warning: the deaths portrayed in this show are real and extremely graphic. The human body is remarkably resilient. Every day we fight a new war against germs, toxins, injury, illness, catastrophe, and calamity. The fact that we survive at all is a miracle. Because every day we live, we face 1,000 ways to die. Billy DeMeo is a few short breaths away from freezing to death. Many of us think, not a bad way to go. It's like falling asleep. If poor Billy here could talk, he'd tell you a different story. South Philly Billy, that's what everybody called him. He got his job in the meatpacking district through a mob-connected cousin. It was a sweet deal. And unlike his co-workers, the cold never bothered Billy. The temperature inside a meat locker is kept at a bone-chilling 10 degrees below zero. Sometimes as a prank, a worker would be locked inside for a minute or two. But when it happened to Billy, it was no joke.
Guys, the door's jammed!
Billy's body temperature starts out at a normal 98.6 degrees. But when that freezer door slammed shut, his death clock started ticking. Time and temperature were now his enemies. After 10 minutes, the palms on Billy's hands are down to 60 degrees. Anyone who's ever been out too long in the cold without gloves knows one thing: it hurts like hell. Capillaries in the surface of the hands constrict, causing blood to retreat deeper into the torso to keep vital organs functioning. This response to severe cold is one of our built-in defense mechanisms. The human body will sacrifice its own toes, fingers, hands, and feet to frostbite in order to ensure survival. 17 minutes in the freezer and Billy's core temperature has dropped to 97 degrees. This triggers a major reaction. Deep inside his brain, the hypothalamus has detected the temperature drop and orders the constriction of the entire web of surface capillaries. His body-warming blood is now in full retreat. Hypothermia, which means a lack of heat, begins to set in when the body's core temperature dips below 95 degrees. It continues to fall about 1 degree every half hour. Billy's core temperature has fallen below 90 degrees, and his eyesight has begun to fail. Such simple things as the numbers on a watch become gibberish. The victim has crossed the border into a medical condition called profound hypothermia. Billy's blood thickens and slows, reducing his ability to burn oxygen. His nerve tissue is getting too cold to transmit electrical impulses, causing his heart to beat erratically. Right before Billy's heart stops forever, a pang of consciousness breaks through the ice. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea to smuggle sides of beef out of the back door. And a really bad idea to have impregnated the boss's 17-year-old granddaughter. There's an old Italian proverb that says revenge is a dish best served cold. Rest in peace, South Philly Billy. When people freeze to death, they are often mistaken as victims of sexual assault. The reason? Right before dying, constricted blood vessels dilate, producing a sensation of extreme heat, prompting them to strip down. It's a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. The passengers in this twin-engine Cessna are about to die. Cause of death? Not what you think. If we back up to the beginning of this story, it's certainly not how these three friends thought their day or lives would end. Richard Paxton and his two pals had been exploring the reefs by Cabo San Lucas for the last 3 days. They decided to squeeze in one last dive before heading home. After an hour at 45 feet, the divers made their way back to the surface, making sure to come up slowly enough to safely release nitrogen gas stored up in their bloodstreams. Decompression sickness, commonly referred to as the bends, poses a serious threat to anyone who scuba dives. Catalina Island houses the largest hyperbaric chamber in Southern California. Hyperbaric comes from the word hyper, meaning above normal, and baric, meaning of pressure. If a diver is suffering from the bends, he's brought here for treatment.
What decompression sickness is, it's normally called the bends. As you go down underwater, breathing air off a scuba cylinder, the air in the tank has about 80% nitrogen. And so the deeper we go and the longer we stay underwater, the more of this nitrogen gets dissolved in the body. As we come up, if the gas isn't released slow enough, that gas could then come out of solution in the form of bubbles. What will happen is you'll have bubbles that could form around the joints and cause pain in the joints. You could have bubbles impinging upon nerves, leading up sometimes to full paralysis.
Richard was eager to get back into his new toy, a present he gave himself for getting his certification to fly a twin-engine aircraft. In his excitement, he forgot one of the cardinal rules of diving. Never dive and fly the same day. As soon as the unpressurized plane climbed out and reached its cruising altitude of 12,000 feet, Richard and his friends began to feel the first symptoms of DCS.
The higher the altitude, the higher the probability of developing decompression sickness. Probably the worst scenario would be something called a vestibular hit, where bubbles form in the balance mechanism of the ear, and you end up with just severe nausea, severe vertigo or dizziness. It's a really bad idea to fly following a dive, yeah.
With Richard at the controls of the plane, but losing control of his mind and body, it was the all-time worst-case scenario. The three men incapacitated by the bends could only watch in horror as their plane augured straight into a mountainside. (1870) New York City. During the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, workers came down with a mysterious malady known as Caisson's disease. The workers would come back to the surface and double over in severe pain, leaving many crippled and some dead. They were suffering from a newly diagnosed illness: the bends. The island country of Haiti knows a thing or two about death. With a history rich in occult ritual and voodoo practices, death is deeply embedded in Haitian culture. They've even turned it into a commodity. One of Haiti's biggest exports are human cadavers for research purposes. But it's on the voodoo scene where Haiti truly garners major death kudos.
This land belongs to me.
These two brothers have squared off over a land dispute. After accusations, insults, and a shove, the man on the ground, James, is thinking about revenge. He seeks out a voodoo witch doctor and arranges a nasty surprise for a brother turned enemy. That white powder seems harmless enough. But it contains a slow-acting poison called tetrodotoxin, or TTX. Tetrodotoxin can be extracted from pufferfish, which in some cultures is considered a delicacy, but with a big risk.
Tetrodotoxin is a nerve toxin that is found in certain fish that are served in Japan. When people eat pufferfish, they sometimes will eat it to get a badge of honor. And the badge of honor is to eat just enough pufferfish to get just enough of the tetrodotoxin poison to cause local poisoning within the mouth. When you eat too much of the pufferfish, or if you eat inappropriate parts of the pufferfish, such as the internal organs, then you can become poisoned with tetrodotoxin.
Just 2 days after quarreling with his angry brother, James was pronounced dead. But when they buried him, he was paralyzed in a zombie-like state, still conscious yet unable to move or scream. He could only watch as he was buried alive.
If you have severe enough poisoning, you can even get low blood pressures, abnormal heart rhythms, and then paralysis that will start in the lower parts of your body and ascend towards the upper parts of your body.
After his burial, James's casket was dug up by grave robbers. When the robbers opened the casket, they were faced with the horrific sight of James, who spent the last minutes of his life trying to claw his way out of the casket, until his fingers were worn down to the bone. The man flapping his arms like a bird is Dolf Schmidt, a German librarian with a serious fetish for fish.
Pure fish.
Dolf longed to be as close to fish as possible, to swim like them, and to swim with them. To achieve this dream, this amateur ichthyologist went so far as to create his own fish suit. He took an old waterbed, cut it up, and glued it into something he called the Merman. Dolf couldn't wait to take it on its maiden voyage. At a nearby lake, he climbed into his fish suit and headed down to the water. But it was slow going, and he started to overheat.
We produce heat internally, and we dissipate that heat to the environment. All cells are metabolically active, and as energy is produced, heat is dissipated.
The human body possesses millions of sweat glands located just beneath the skin. When body temperature rises, sweat begins to form in these glands and is secreted to the surface. As the sweat evaporates, heat is dissipated and cools off the body.
The example of that man who put that waterbed material on him, those water molecules could not penetrate. He put a microclimate next to his skin. He had a double whammy. He basically couldn't lose heat by sweating, and he couldn't lose heat by radiation. So there was no way that he was going to dissipate heat. If the temperature outside was cool, that could have saved him.
Unfortunately for Dolf, it was a scorcher, 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Not long after starting for the water, he began feeling the first symptoms of hypothermia.
Initially, it could be heat cramps, where you're going to start to see some pain. Then it goes to heat prostration. You're not going to have a tension. You're going to be a little bit delirious, loss of balance, and then it goes to heat stroke. If you get into heat stroke, that's a critical area, because if you don't get cooled down rapidly, you'll never survive.
To reach a point of heat stroke would normally take about 3 hours. It was so hot and Dolf exerted so much energy, he got there in less than 15 minutes. With the lake's edge tantalizingly close, Dolf's core temperature peaked at 108 degrees. Right before he died, Dolf finally got his wish. He knew exactly what it felt like to be a fish out of water. We've watched stories of people who died accidentally, tragically, or just through plain stupidity. But when we murder each other, death becomes even more gruesome. That brings us to our next story. Any married man out there knows what it's like to be pecked to death. Back in the 2nd century, it had a different meaning. Let's say you're the guy with the beard in the bad fur coat, and you had incurred the wrath of the tribal leaders. Here's what would happen. They would wrap you up in a freshly killed animal skin and then take you out into the forest and leave you tied to a tree. What happens next would depend upon which carnivores were around. Most likely vultures would quickly pick up the scent and descend upon you like a fat kid on a Happy Meal. Their razor-sharp beaks would tear you apart, while you would helplessly watch yourself get eaten alive. Those were the days.
Hi, what's your name?
You know my name. You yell every night.
Her name is Shauna Richardson, and this is Rick West, her husband and jump instructor. Shauna is about to make her first solo parachute jump.
All right, Shana, what are you getting ready to do?
My first AFF.
All righty then.
AFF stands for Accelerated Freefall, and Shauna was prepared. It was a perfect morning outside of Joplin, Missouri, a good day to jump. Once the jump plane reached 12,000 feet, Shauna and Rick climbed out on the wing and flew off. Rick recorded the event on a video camera.
Woo! Good job, Shana. Yeah, it's my girl.
Looked up and said, good job, Shana, you did a good job. And then a few seconds later, I see her spinning in front of me. And I'm thinking, you shouldn't be doing this. I thought she was doing it for fun. Seconds later, I started realizing she's not having fun, that we have a problem here.
Shana! Shana!
My heart went to my throat. I couldn't hardly breathe. I was like, oh man, I got to do something for her. What can I do? Can I get close enough? She comes so close, man. I had thoughts of, man, if you could just jump down, dive in real quick and grab her. But then I knew, in reality, that if I tried to grab her, we could probably tangle parachutes and both fall to our death. So I spin on top of her, yelling at her, pump the brakes. That's what I'm yelling, is pump the brakes.
Pump the brakes! Pump the brakes! Pump the brakes! Shana! Pump the brakes!
She's yelling back at me. I'm yelling, pump the brakes. She goes, I am, it's not working. You can't hear that in the video, but it's actually happening. And I'm feeling sick to my stomach, by the time we get close to the landing.
God damn it!
There was my girlfriend, someone that I loved and cared about, that had hit the pavement, and she hit pretty hard and made a big pop, and then it was silence after that, and I just thought that most likely she was dead. So I shut the video off and ran up to her.
Her partially open chute had broken some of her fall, but Shauna still came in fast and hit the pavement at 55 miles per hour, face first.
And she spit a bunch of her teeth out, and there's blood coming out of her eyes, her ears, her nose. It was pretty rough. And she's like, am I alive?
This is one time where someone who should have died didn't. Against all odds, Shauna Richardson survived her terrible fall. With 1,000 ways to die, she had found one way to live. Death. We avoid it at all costs. We defy it, and we deny it. But it's as much a part of our lives as life itself. Whether we're whistling in the graveyard or planning our own funeral, Every beginning has an end, just like this show.
It's original.